Hello everybody, welcome to the Clearview channel. Today's episode is part 5 of our 6-part series on motivational interviewing. This is about the basic process of motivational interviewing. Pay particular attention to rolling with resistance. Such an important thing that I learned in this process and something that could really help you today. I'm joined again by my colleague, Steph Ray, licensed clinical social worker. Steph, the basic principles of motivational interview. Break it down for us.
Sure. So there are 4 basic processes of motivational interviewing, and we start with engaging, and then it's focusing, and then it's evoking, and then finally we have the planning. And they go hand in hand with the stages of change. So that first one is engaging, and it is the most important piece of the process of motivational interviewing because it essentially entails building rapport. And you cannot have any sort of change without that trust and that rapport.
Okay, so basically if someone is dysregulated in front of you, are you using this moment or are you kind of giving them space, waiting for them to come off of it to then engage?
I would say it depends, and it depends on the individual. Sometimes building rapport looks like just mirroring and matching. So for instance, in that situation, if somebody is having a really hard time and they're decompensating and they're sitting on the floor and they're crying, maybe you might sit on the floor and mirror exactly what they're doing, but you're just being quiet. That's building rapport. It's showing that you're there with them and that you're listening. There is a skill that motivational interviewing uses to help build rapport, and it is we use the term OARS to help us remember.
OARS.
So that's O-A-R-S. And O stands for open-ended questions. So instead of asking you, how's your day today? That's a closed-ended question because it's very easy to just say, meh, or it's good. An open-ended question would be, what was the most exciting thing that you've done today? Because then it gets them to start talking. And if you can get them to start talking, that's where you can take a hold and build relationship. So the A in OARS stands for affirmations.
Affirmations, which are what?
Which is, again, eliciting and drawing out and mirroring back to the individual what their strengths are.
Right, so for example, if I would say, you know, I just want to observe, like, I saw you catch yourself short there before you really lost it. Like, that was pretty impressive.
Yes.
And that's progress. Let's just recognize that for progress.
Exactly. And again, if you remember, in the spirit of motivational interviewing, affirmations is a huge piece of the spirit because we're not looking at what they're doing wrong, but we're seeing what they're doing right. We're acknowledging their change and we're affirming them for that.
Makes sense.
The next one is R, which stands for reflective listening, which in Clearview terms is the responsible listening model.
Right. It's important to you affirm that I heard you, but you also have to lean with empathy. Right. Like I can listen to you and be a robot. What I heard you say is what this means to, no. I mean, I think most important thing is like, what that meant, what you said, what that meant to me was this. Is that right? And
what you're doing there is you're connecting the spirit of MI with the processes and with the skills. So you see how that works. You have to come into it with that mindset.
Right.
And we'll talk more about different types of reflective listening because they're amazing tools to really elicit different responses and help the individual bring about the change within themselves. The last one is summarizing, which goes hand in hand with reflective listening. It's just a little bit more broad. So I would say reflective listening is more quick and in the moment, and summarizing is, okay, so what I heard you said, and you summarize overall what the issue is.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I'm using OARS, I am accomplishing the engagement component of the process of motivational interviewing. What's the next component or in the process of motivational interviewing?
So the next component is focusing.
Focusing. Engagement, focusing,
And focusing essentially, you know, you've already built that rapport, they trust you, and again, it's the most important piece because the most important part of any sort of therapeutic relationship, it doesn't matter if you are coming in with a bunch of nonsense. The most important piece is the therapeutic relationship. So you have to build that foundation first. You have to have them trust you, and you have to be in that collaboration, that partnership. once when they're comfortable with you, they'll start opening up a little bit, and you can use different tools and skills to help focus, which again is the second process of motivational interviewing. And focusing just kind of listens to what they're saying, and it helps really understand maybe, what is it exactly that needs to change if you want it to change.
Right.
And so we're using several different skills or tools, which again we'll talk in one of the next videos, of developing the discrepancies and holding up a mirror to them. So what I hear you say is that you value this, but your actions don't really align. Why do you think that that's like that? And it's highlighting the cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
And it's slowly just chipping away to where we have an idea or an understanding of the actual behavior that is not serving them, that maybe they want to change.
So to me, focusing, as you described it, is basically creating safety around, let's really hone in on what's behind some of this without telling them stop doing it. You're basically saying, I want to really dig in here.
Yeah.
So you gave us some good acronyms for engaging. Are there any good acronyms under focusing?
Not under focusing. Those are more skills, which we'll talk about in the next segment.
Okay. So let's jump into part 3 of this basic process of motivational interviewing. What is part 3?
So part 3 is evoking.
Evoking. Okay, what's evoking?
Evoking is essentially you are evoking that decision to change, or that you're evoking their own motivation to change.
Okay, so you're creating safety around the conversation about change. And a lot of that conversation at this point, depending on what stage of change they're in, it could have some resistance or some negativity. Like, how do you roll with that resistance?
Right, so if you remember in the 6 principles of motivational interviewing, the last one is that ambivalence and resistance is a part of it.
Right.
And so just understanding that you can let go and you don't have to force anybody to change really takes a lot of pressure off of the clinician or the staff member. When you notice that there's resistance happening, you don't have to push it, you don't have to force it. The skills that I use a lot of the time is I'm just reflecting what they're saying, and I'm reframing what they're saying. That goes hand in hand with listening. Another piece of it is you'll never respond with confrontation. It's never going to work. You want to allow the individual to express these ambivalences, this resistance, and then use that as a way to guide your next set of questioning so that you can elicit more information and use it as a different intervention.
So within this never respond with confrontation, if they are sitting there and just not willing to do what you want them to do, but they're not engaging you, they're just shaking their head. The goal is not to say, well, you have this consequence. The role basically is to mirror back to them the same behavior. Maybe you sit down crisscross applesauce and you just sit there. That's not responding with confrontation. That's rolling with resistance. So that's 2 components. Is there anything else with rolling with resistance that our audience needs to understand?
The last piece is just avoiding the righting reflex. So as clinicians or people who find themselves in this position where they're implementing motivational interviewing, they naturally want to make a situation better.
Right.
And it's not about making the situation better, it's just holding the space for what is. So
I'm there to accept that their ambivalence is their own. I'm there to not create confrontation, especially with my words. And thirdly, I'm there to not try and fix it, which is my natural instinct. Those are the 3 components of rolling with resistance. Is that right?
There's 4 of them.
There's 4 of them.
The last one is you're just refraining, or I'm sorry. The last one is you're reframing and reflecting.
Okay.
So if they're sitting there and they're like, this is stupid, or I hate this, it's just reflecting back. Okay, so you think that this is really stupid and you really hate that. Yeah, I can totally get that.
Yeah. So those are the 4 components of rolling with resistance.
Right. Whereas meeting them with confrontation is this isn't stupid, you need this. You hear the difference there.
100%. 100%. I'm basically inflicting them with my opinion versus being like, yeah, so what you're saying is it's kind of stupid.
Yep, exactly, which again, that's weaving in the spirit of motivational interviewing.
So what's the fourth part? I heard about engaging, I heard about focusing, I've heard about evoking. What's the fourth part?
The fourth part is planning.
Planning, okay. What's planning?
So planning is when they have accepted that there is something that they want to change, and they're not too sure if they can change, or they're a little hesitant to try, they don't know how. It's the phase where we start to give more affirmations, and we start helping them identify what are the roadblocks and showing that, or helping to highlight that they can do it, and we're guiding them with SMART goals.
So you mentioned SMART goals under planning. I remember SMART goals from college. SMART goals are goals that are specific, goals that are measurable, goals that are attainable, goals that are realistic, and goals that have timing to them. Like President Kennedy, we will send a man to the moon and back before the end of this decade. That's a SMART goal.
Yes, and SMART goals are important because it's helping them to remove the obstacle of failure. Because a lot of times, once when an individual gains that confidence that they can change, again, let's take drinking for an example. They might plan on, I'm going to be sober for the rest of my life. And is that realistic? Not in the beginning. And you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you can break it down and look at it at chunks, then it makes it easier or instills more confidence in the individual that they can achieve that.
And you would push back on that, not by saying that's not realistic. You push back like, are you sure that seems like a pretty lofty goal to say you're never going to have a drink the rest of your life? Is that actually doable?
Yeah, so with a lot of my clients, I see that, and I will ask them, I was like, is that realistic? Is there a way that we can break this down that would be a little easier to digest at first?
You know, as you've been explaining this, Steph, I really see how the stages of change, identifying what stage of change that the person in front of you is at, and then applying one of these four components to that stage of change. So between engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning, if they're in, for example, pre-contemplative, where they don't think they've got a problem, to use techniques and skills around evoking wouldn't make sense. It'd be incongruent and create actually problems.
Exactly.
So how do you take the four processes of motivational interviewing and apply them to the stages of change?
That's a great question, and I think that that's the most important piece, is understanding the stages of change, because when you really understand what the stages of change looks like and you can assess where an individual is at in their own stage of change, you will know which phase or process of motivational interviewing to use to engage them. So for instance, in the first process of motivational interviewing, engaging, where you're just building rapport, you're not even having any sort of change talk, they're in pre-contemplation.
Right.
You're just getting to know them. You're just building rapport. You're asking them about their favorite books or what they like to do. You're building that trust.
Right.
And then focusing is the process that helps shift an individual from that pre-contemplation to contemplation.
Right.
Where again, that focusing is sanding away to a little clearer of, okay, what might the issue be, which is exactly what contemplation is. Okay, so maybe there is an issue, but I'm not ready to do it.
Right.
And evoking is used to address what that issue is and start to instill hope and reasons, I'm sorry, not even instill, to elicit from the individual hope and reasons as to why they might want to change. And so you use evoking to help move them from contemplation to preparation and planning. And preparation and planning is exactly the fourth phase of motivational interviewing, which is planning. And it's like, okay, cool. So you're ready to change. What do we have to do to get there? What does this look like? I
could see how some of those techniques you talked about in Rolling with Resistance will be very helpful in moving a kid from contemplation into preparation. I could see how that would help motivate them to take that next step. And that's all we're looking for, is one step more. Mm-hmm. One step more, no matter how big, to make that progress. Excellent. Well, stay tuned for our next and final episode regarding motivational interviewing. And these are all about the skills, this exact skills that you are going to use today in motivational interviewing. Stay tuned.